The heat in Ouagadougou pressed down like a physical weight, a constant, shimmering presence that distorted the air and clung to the skin. It was under this relentless sun, specifically in the late afternoon's deceptive lull, that the operation unfolded with silent, brutal efficiency. Antoine Duval, known in certain circles by a number and in others by a diplomatic alias, felt the world tilt not with a bang, but with a sudden, crushing silence. One moment he was finalizing a precarious exchange of sensitive data near a nondescript cafe, the next, a hand clamped over his mouth, another twisted his arm behind his back with professional force, and he was being bundled into the suffocating interior of a dark SUV. There was no struggle, not a meaningful one. These weren't opportunistic street thugs. The precision, the speed, the utter lack of noise, it spoke of state-level execution. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through his trained composure. This wasn't a mugging. This wasn't a simple arrest. This was a snatch. And as the vehicle accelerated, merging seamlessly into the chaotic city traffic, Duval knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his gut, that his carefully constructed world had just imploded. He was off the grid. Completely exposed. And whoever had him clearly knew who, and what, he was. The silence inside the vehicle was broken only by the rumble of the engine and the frantic beating of his own heart, a drum against the heavy drape of his unknown fate. The concrete walls of the city blurred past the tinted windows, indistinguishable in his disoriented state. He tried to process, to catalog, to analyze, but the speed of it, the sheer unexpectedness, left his mind reeling. Every scenario planned for, every contingency mapped out, none of them started quite like this. This felt personal, deliberate, and absolute. The journey was surprisingly short, or perhaps the adrenaline simply compressed time. The vehicle pulled into a secure compound, the gates massive and reinforced, swinging open just enough to swallow them whole before clanging shut. The air inside was still, the sounds of the city muted. Duval was roughly pulled from the SUV, his eyes still adjusting to the relative dimness of the compound compared to the blinding sun outside. He was led, not gently, down a short corridor and into a room. It wasn't a typical prison cell. It was Spartan, clean, functional. A metal table, 2 chairs bolted to the floor. The walls were bare concrete, the lighting harsh and fluorescent. He was searched again, thoroughly, his few personal effects confiscated. His phone, encrypted and wiped remotely the second he felt the hand on his mouth, was a useless block of metal, but they took it anyway. His watch, his belt, the small, innocuous items that could hold secrets or pose a risk. The guards were silent, efficient, their faces impassive beneath their caps. They cuffed his hands in front of him and indicated he should sit on one of the chairs. The door locked with a heavy thud, leaving him alone in the sterile silence. The quiet was almost worse than the chaos of the capture. It allowed the implications to flood in. A secure compound. Professional operatives. A clean room designed for, what? Interrogation. The word echoed in his mind, cold and unforgiving. Who was he being held by? The state security services, obviously. But at whose direction? The answer, he suspected, was far higher up the chain. This wasn't a routine counter-espionage bust. This felt significant. Political. High stakes. Every minute that passed in that room amplified the feeling of isolation and the terrifying realization that his disappearance would already be triggering alarms, setting off protocols that might or might not reach him in time. Or ever. Hours bled into an indistinguishable mass. There was no natural light, no clock. Meals, if you could call them that, a simple plate of rice and some kind of stew, were brought and taken away in silence. He tried to listen to the sounds outside the room, to gauge his location, the routine of the guards, any scrap of information. Footsteps echoed occasionally, voices were low and indistinguishable. The building seemed solid, built for security. He tested the cuffs gently, assessing the metal, the locking mechanism. Standard issue, robust. No obvious escape routes. His training kicked in, a familiar framework in the disorienting void. Assess, analyze, wait, observe. Don't give anything away unnecessarily. Prepare for questions, for pressure, for mind games. But beneath the training, the primal fear remained, a low hum of dread. Who were they waiting for? What did they want? He ran through his recent activities, his contacts, his mission parameters. Had he been compromised? Was it a leak? A surveillance pickup? Had one of his carefully cultivated sources betrayed him? The possibilities swirled, each one leading down a rabbit hole of potential vulnerabilities. He focused on controlling his breathing, conserving energy, keeping his mind sharp. Sleep offered little respite, broken by the uncertainty and the discomfort of the chair. The fluorescent light hummed incessantly, a constant, irritating buzz that seemed designed to fray the nerves. This was the waiting game, a classic tactic. Isolate the subject, deprive them of stimuli, let their own mind become the enemy. But Duval was trained for this. He pushed back the fear, the doubt, and settled into the grim reality of his situation. He was a ghost caught in the machine. Then, the door opened. Not for a guard with food, but with a different kind of energy. Two men entered, one large and imposing, the other slightly smaller but with an air of quiet authority. Behind them, flanked by two more guards, stepped the figure who immediately commanded the room's attention. He wasn't tall, but his presence filled the space. He wore simple, functional military fatigues, no elaborate insignia, yet there was no mistaking him. The sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, the set jaw, the aura of unwavering resolve. It was him. The man whose name was on everyone's lips, the leader who had seized control of the nation. Captain IBRAHIM TRAORÉ. Duval felt a fresh wave of cold wash over him, but he kept his face neutral. This wasn't just a state security matter anymore. This was personal, directed from the very top. The stakes had just skyrocketed into the stratosphere. Traoré didn't speak immediately. He walked slowly around the table, his gaze fixed on Duval. It wasn't an aggressive stare, but an intensely analytical one, like a scientist examining a specimen. He circled once, twice, the silence stretching, thick with unspoken tension. Duval met his gaze directly, neither defiant nor submissive. Just present. Waiting. The air in the room crackled with the weight of the moment, the convergence of two vastly different worlds, two opposing forces, brought together in this stark, anonymous room. Traoré finally stopped opposite Duval, placing his hands flat on the table, leaning slightly forward. His expression remained unreadable, a mask of calm intensity. Agent Antoine Duval, Traoré said, his voice quiet, measured, carrying a surprising weight. It wasn't accusatory, merely stating a fact. The use of his cover name was deliberate, a subtle power play, showing they knew his identity. Duval offered no response, his face a carefully constructed blank slate. He was Antoine Duval, diplomat, cultural attaché. He had papers, a history, a cover story ironclad enough to pass muster in most situations. But clearly, not this one. Traoré observed him for another long moment, as if searching for a flicker of something in his eyes. Or should I use your real name? Traoré continued, the question hanging in the air. He didn't offer the real name. He didn't need to. The implication was clear, we know who you are, deep down. Duval maintained his silence. Every word spoken could be a trap, every reaction analyzed. His training dictated caution, observation, revealing nothing. Traoré finally pushed a file across the table towards Duval. It was thin, surprisingly so. Not the thick dossier of a long-term investigation, but something more focused. Duval glanced at it. A grainy photo of him taken from a distance. A transcript fragment, clearly intercepted communications, full of technical jargon and code words that would mean nothing to an outsider but screamed intelligence operative to anyone who knew what they were looking at. Coordinates. Dates. And names. Not Duval's name, but names of Burkinabe citizens. Contacts. Sources. The carefully built network, exposed. Seeing those names felt like a physical blow. These weren't just assets, some were individuals he had developed relationships with, people who trusted him, who believed in the information they were sharing, often at immense personal risk. His carefully maintained professional distance fractured slightly at the sight. These people were now in grave danger because of him, because of this failure. He forced himself to breathe through the sudden spike of panic and guilt. He couldn't afford emotion now. Traoré watched him closely, noting the subtle shift in his posture, the momentary tension around his eyes at the sight of the file. "Your work is extensive, Mr. Duval. Or Agent Duval. Or whatever name you use when you plot against my country." There was no heat in the accusation, just a weary sort of understanding. "My name is Antoine Duval." "I am a diplomat," Duval replied, his voice steady, adhering strictly to his cover. It was futile, he knew, but it was the protocol. Maintain the cover until it is demonstrably impossible. Traoré gave a short, humorless sound that might have been a laugh. "A diplomat. Indeed. Is it customary for diplomats to exchange encrypted data packets in back alleys? To cultivate sources within the military and government? To track the movements of foreign advisors?" He gestured at the file. "This is not the work of a diplomat, Mr. Duval. This is the work of a spy." The word hung in the air. Spy. It stripped away the pretense, the carefully crafted facade. Duval said nothing. There was no point in denying the evidence laid out before him, however incomplete it might be. "We have been watching for some time," Traoré continued, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more narrative. "Watching the shadows where foreign interests still linger. Watching the hands that try to pull strings from afar. Your activities became noticeable. Pervasive. You were not seeking friendship, Mr. Duval. You were seeking leverage. Weakness. Points of entry to maintain control, to dictate our path. My role is to understand the political situation, to report back to my government, to foster cooperation," Duval said, sticking to the core truth of his cover, framing it in diplomatic terms. Traoré leaned back slightly, his eyes still locked on Duval. "Understanding and interference are cousins, Mr. Duval. But you went beyond understanding. You sought to shape. To influence outcomes that serve your interests, not ours. To ensure that Burkina Faso remains compliant." The word compliant was delivered with a sharp edge of contempt. He paused, the silence stretching again, heavy with history and unspoken grievances. "France has a long history here," Traoré said, his voice lower now, more reflective. "A history of dictating, of extracting, of treating sovereign nations as extensions of its own will. We are trying to build something new here, Mr. Duval. Something independent. Something for us. And the old ways, the old influences, they are obstacles. France seeks a stable and prosperous Burkina Faso," Duval stated. It was the standard line, hollow in the face of the reality in the room. "Stable under whose thumb?" Traoré challenged gently. "Prosperous for whom? For too long, stability meant suppressing dissent against your interests. Prosperity meant wealth flowing outwards, not building up our people." He gestured around the room, though there was nothing to see but bare walls. "We are not pawns on a chessboard, Mr. Duval. We are a nation. With our own aspirations. Our own destiny." He stood up and walked to the side of the table, looking down at Duval. "Your capture is not just about intelligence, Mr. Duval. It is a message. A very clear message. To your government. And to others who might think they can continue to operate here with impunity." Duval felt the weight of the geopolitical implications settle upon him. He wasn't just Antoine Duval, agent caught in the act. He was a symbol, a bargaining chip, a public declaration of defiance against former colonial powers. His individual fate was now intertwined with the complex, often volatile, relationship between Burkina Faso and France. "What is your message, Captain?" Duval asked, deciding to lean into the reality of the situation. The cover was clearly blown beyond repair. Now it was about understanding his captor's objective. Traoré returned to his chair, his expression hardening slightly. "The message is simple: Burkina Faso is sovereign. Its security is paramount. Any attempt to undermine that security, from within or without, will be met with force." He looked at the file again. And those who facilitate such attempts will face justice. Both the foreign agents and their collaborators. The mention of collaborators sent another jolt through Duval. What did they know? How many names were in that file that hadn't been shown to him? His priority shifted from protecting himself to protecting the network, or at least mitigating the damage. My contacts were individuals concerned about the direction the country was taking, Duval said, trying to frame it politically rather than as espionage. They sought alternative perspectives, information. Information for whom? Traoré's voice was sharp now. For a foreign power seeking to influence the government, to counter perceived rival influences? Don't insult my intelligence, Mr. Duval. Your sources were providing classified information, military movements, political strategies. This is not seeking alternative perspectives. This is treason for them, and espionage for you. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The initial calm, the almost philosophical discussion, had given way to the hard reality of the situation. Duval was a spy caught red-handed, and his contacts were potentially facing execution. What do you want? Duval asked, his voice low. This was the critical question. Was this about a public trial, a propaganda victory? Or was there a negotiation to be had? Traoré leaned forward, his gaze intense. I want the truth, Mr. Duval. The complete truth. About your mission. About your network. About France's intentions here. I can't betray confidences, Duval stated. It was a line drawn in the sand, a test of wills. Traoré smiled thinly, a chilling expression that didn't reach his eyes. Everyone has their price, agent. Or their breaking point. For some, it is pain. For others, it is the knowledge that their actions have destroyed the lives of those they claim to care about. He tapped the file. Those names, they are people with families. Futures. Futures that are now very uncertain. Duval felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was the pressure point. His own fate was secondary to the lives of the people he had put at risk. But giving up everything would be a catastrophic failure, damaging not just the immediate network but potentially jeopardizing countless other operations and agents. He had to find a balance, a way to offer something without giving away the farm. Let's start with why you were specifically targeting information about Russian presence, Traoré said, shifting tactics slightly. Your intercepts show a keen interest in their advisors, their movements, their interactions with my government. Why was that a priority for French intelligence? This was a slightly safer ground than discussing his local contacts. He could talk about geopolitical concerns without revealing specific sources. France, like many Western nations, is concerned about the increasing influence of non-traditional partners in the region, Duval explained, adopting a more analytical, less personal tone. We believe it can lead to instability, debt traps, and a shift away from democratic principles and human rights. Traoré listened, his expression unreadable. Or perhaps you are concerned because it challenges your own traditional influence, he suggested. Because it offers us alternatives to the relationships you have carefully cultivated to serve your interests? A multipolar world requires careful navigation, Duval conceded. Our interest is in understanding these dynamics, not preventing your sovereign choices. But understanding allows us to prepare, to adapt our own policies and partnerships. By attempting to gather intelligence that could be used to undermine those new partnerships? To sow discord? To pressure us back into the old embrace? Traoré countered, his voice rising slightly, the frustration evident. Your actions, Mr. Duval, speak louder than your diplomatic explanations. You were not observing, you were actively interfering. He leaned forward again. Let's talk about the funds. We have traced transfers. Significant sums of money. For operational expenses? Or for inducements? Duval's mind raced. They knew about the money transfers. That wasn't entirely unexpected. Covert operations required funding. Explaining it convincingly without revealing specific recipients was crucial. Operational costs. logistical support, travel, communication equipment, securing safe locations. Running an intelligence operation is expensive. And your sources, Traoré said, returning to the sensitive topic, did they provide their services out of patriotic conviction? Or were they compensated for the risks they took? Silence hung heavy in the room. Admitting payment confirmed collaboration and provided a motive that could be used against the contacts. Denying it was laughable in the context of the evidence. Intelligence gathering sometimes involves financial transactions to cover expenses or compensate for time and risk, Duval admitted carefully, choosing his words with precision. It is not inherently malicious. It is a reality of operating in complex environments. Complex environments you are actively making more complex with your interference, Traoré finished for him. He stood up abruptly, the scrape of the chair on the concrete floor loud in the silence. He walked back towards the door, flanked by his guards. Think carefully, Mr. Duval, Traoré said, stopping at the threshold. Your government will inevitably make noise. They will deny everything. They will demand your release. But you are here. In my custody. And I have the evidence of your activities. Your fate, and perhaps the fate of those you endangered, rests on the choices you make now. We will talk again. The door closed, the lock clicking into place. Duval was alone again, but the silence was now filled with the echo of Traoré's words and the weight of the file on the table. The interrogation had begun. It wasn't a crude beating or psychological torture in the traditional sense, at least not yet. It was a battle of information, of wills, of political positioning. Traoré was intelligent, focused, and clearly had a strategic objective beyond simply catching a spy. He wanted to expose the reach of foreign powers, to assert sovereignty, and perhaps to gain leverage on the international stage. Duval was not just a captive, he was a political tool. The following days blurred into a monotonous cycle of waiting and interrogation sessions. Traoré himself wasn't always present. Sometimes, the large man who had accompanied him on the first day, introduced simply as Colonel Diallo, the chief of security, conducted the questioning. Diallo was less philosophical than Traoré, more direct, focusing on specific operational details, names, dates, locations. He used maps, photographs, fragments of intercepted communications, piecing together a mosaic of Duval's activities. This meeting on the 15th, Diallo pressed, pointing to a blurry photograph. Near the Central Market. Who was this individual? Duval recognized the person. A mid-level government official who had concerns about corruption and the influence of certain foreign entities. Revealing his identity would be a death sentence. A contact, Duval said flatly. A contact providing what information? Diallo's voice was like gravel. Context on local politics. Diallo leaned forward, his face inches from Duval's. Context? Or classified documents? Or details about troop movements? Don't lie to me, Duval. We have other ways of finding out. He tapped the photograph. He is already in custody. He can confirm what you discussed. It would be easier for everyone if you were truthful. Duval's stomach clenched. They had arrested his contacts. How many? The thought was sickening. He looked at the photograph again, studying the man's face. He looked tired, perhaps scared. Had he broken under interrogation? Had he revealed everything? Or was Diallo bluffing, trying to force a confession? This was the worst kind of pressure, not on himself, but on those he was responsible for. He remembered the risk they knew they were taking, the promises he had implicitly made of protection through discretion and operational security. And he had failed. I cannot discuss individuals without their consent, Duval said, the standard diplomatic evasion, feeling utterly inadequate in the face of the potential consequences. Diallo laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. Consent? He is in my custody. His consent is irrelevant. Your protection is irrelevant. What is relevant is the security of this nation. And anyone who undermines it, agent or collaborator, will face consequences. He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. You can help them, Duval. By being honest about the extent of your network. By showing your cooperation. Perhaps then, Captain Traoré might show leniency to those you misguided. It was a clear offer, trade information for the potential safety of his contacts. A classic dilemma in espionage. Protect the mission, protect the network, or try to save individuals caught in the crossfire? Duval knew the rules. The mission and the network came first. Individual assets were, tragically, often expendable when compromised. But these weren't just dots on a chart, they were people. People who had trusted him. Their actions were driven by their own beliefs, Duval said, attempting to shift the blame away from himself as a manipulator. They were not being paid to betray their country. They were sharing concerns. Concerns orchestrated and exploited by a foreign intelligence service. Diallo retorted, slamming his hand on the table. The calm facade was cracking, revealing the anger beneath. Don't pretend this was some kind of noble exchange of ideas. You are a spy, Duval, and they were traitors. Your job was to weaken this government, to gather information that France could use against us. My job was to understand the situation, Duval repeated, clinging to the remnants of his cover story and its inherent ambiguity. Diallo leaned back, his eyes narrowed. We have satellite imagery of your movements. Records of encrypted communications. Intercepted messages from your handlers expressing frustration at the pace of your reporting and urging you to cultivate higher-level sources. Does that sound like understanding the situation, or actively trying to penetrate the highest levels of government? They knew more than he had initially assumed. The file Traoré showed him was just a teaser. They had been under surveillance for a significant period. Duval felt a chill. How deep did their intelligence go? Had he walked into a trap that had been prepared long in advance? During the breaks between interrogations, the isolation was almost unbearable. He tried meditation, mental exercises, reviewing his training. He analyzed every word exchanged, every gesture made by Traoré and Diallo. What were their motivations? Beyond the stated goal of national security, was there a political agenda? A need for a public spectacle? A desire to send a strong message to France specifically? Or was it simply about consolidating power and eliminating any perceived threats, foreign or domestic? He thought about his life in Paris, the anonymity, the quiet intensity of his job, the carefully separated personal life. He thought about his handler, Isabelle, a sharp, pragmatic woman who ran the Africa desk. What was she doing now? Was she fighting for him? Or was he already being written off as a loss? The brutal calculus of the intelligence world offered little comfort. One evening, after a particularly grueling session with Diallo, a different guard brought his meal. This one wasn't silent. As he placed the tray on the table, he spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper in French. They know you are here. Your people. Duval's head snapped up. He stared at the guard, searching his face. It was young, impassive. Was this a trick? A test? Or was it a genuine, if risky, message? Who are you? Duval asked, his voice hoarse. The guard didn't answer directly. He just met Duval's eyes for a fraction of a second, a fleeting look that held something more than simple professional duty, perhaps sympathy, perhaps something else entirely. Then he turned and left, the door closing softly behind him. The message, real or fake, disrupted Duval's carefully managed composure. His people knew. They were aware. That meant they were working. It ignited a flicker of hope, a possibility of rescue or negotiation. But it also raised new questions. How did they know? Was the compound compromised? Or had Traoré allowed the information to leak, as part of his strategy? The next session was again with Captain Traoré. He seemed calmer than Diallo, returning to his earlier, more measured approach. He didn't mention the message from the guard. Mr. Duval, Traoré began, sitting opposite him. Let's speak frankly. France has denied any knowledge of your activities. They maintain you are a diplomat acting within your mandate. Publicly, of course. And privately? Duval prompted. Traoré leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips. Privately, there are discussions. Concerns raised. Appeals made through back channels. The standard diplomatic dance when a hand is caught in the cookie jar. This confirmed the guard's message, at least partially. Paris was engaged. They hadn't abandoned him. The relief was palpable, a loosening of the tension that had coiled within him for days. They are worried about the implications, naturally, Traoré continued. The exposure of their intelligence gathering. The potential for embarrassment. The risk to their relationships in the region. And what do you propose to do? Duval asked directly. This was it. The negotiation, or the ultimatum. Traoré became serious again. That depends on you, Mr. Duval. And on your government. I have options. A public trial. Parading you before the media, showcasing the evidence of French interference. This would be a powerful statement. A demonstration of our sovereignty and a warning to others. Duval listened, his mind working furiously. A public trial. That would be catastrophic. For him, for his contacts, for France's image. It would burn his network completely, expose methods, potentially create a diplomatic firestorm that could destabilize the region further. Or, Traoré went on, there could be a different path. A less public one. But it would require a level of honesty and cooperation we have not yet seen from you. What kind of cooperation? Duval asked, his voice cautious. Information, Traoré stated simply. Real, verifiable information about the extent of French intelligence operations in Burkina Faso. Not just your network, but the broader strategy. The objectives. The assets that were not compromised. This was the core demand. Betray everything. Give up the entire operation. I cannot do that, Duval said firmly. His duty, his training, his code, they all forbade it. Traoré didn't seem surprised. Your loyalty is commendable, Mr. Duval. But misplaced. Your government is already calculating the cost of retrieving you versus the cost of your secrets being revealed. In their calculus, you are a resource. A valuable one, perhaps, but still just one piece on the board. I understand the risks of my profession, Duval replied. Do you understand the risks faced by those who helped you? Traoré challenged, his voice sharp. The men and women in that file? They are facing charges of treason. Punishable by death. Your silence, your loyalty to a foreign power, could sign their death warrants. This was the psychological warfare, expertly wielded. The lives of his contacts. It was the hardest pressure point, designed to crack his resolve. He thought of the faces in the blurry photos, the conversations, the shared anxieties. Could he live with himself if his silence condemned them? Their fate is in your hands, Captain, Duval said, trying to turn the pressure back, however futilely. It is in your hands, Mr. Duval, Traoré corrected, leaning forward. Your cooperation could lead to clemency. Acknowledgement of being misguided, rather than malicious traitors. Your silence guarantees their severe punishment as a warning to others. He paused, letting that sink in. And it guarantees your own severe punishment, likely a lengthy prison sentence, far from home, with no guarantee of ever seeing France again. The offer was stark: betray his mission and his contacts to potentially save some of them, or protect the network and condemn them, while ensuring his own harsh fate. It was an impossible choice, designed to break him. Let me ask you something, Captain, Duval said, shifting the focus, trying to regain some control of the conversation, or at least buy time to think. You speak of sovereignty, of independence. But you are increasingly aligning yourself with Russia. Replacing one foreign influence with another? How is that true independence? Traoré didn't react defensively to the challenge. He considered the question for a moment. Independence does not mean isolation, Mr. Duval. It means having the freedom to choose your partners. To diversify your relationships. France offered us a relationship based on historical dominance. Russia offers us a relationship based on different terms. Terms that, for now, serve our immediate needs. Military support, security training, resources without the lectures on governance or the demands for economic concessions that perpetuate dependence. And you trust them not to exert their own influence? Duval asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. Traoré's expression was complex. Trust is a fluid concept in international relations, Mr. Duval. We trust them to help us secure our nation against the threats we face, threats your country, despite its presence for decades, failed to fully neutralize. We are not naive. We understand that every nation acts in its own interest. The difference is that Russia, at this moment, provides what we urgently need without demanding the same level of political subservience that the old relationships did. We are not exchanging one master for another. We are creating options. Leveraging alternatives. That is the essence of pragmatic sovereignty in the modern world. He looked at Duval intently. This conversation is interesting, Mr. Duval, but it distracts from the matter at hand. Your situation. The fate of your collaborators. My offer stands. Full disclosure of your activities and the French intelligence architecture in Burkina Faso. In exchange, I will consider leniency for some of your contacts, and your own situation will be re-evaluated. A refusal means the public rout. Exposure. Severe consequences for all involved. Duval knew he was cornered. The ideal scenario, rescue, seemed increasingly unlikely given the security of his location and the political sensitivity. A simple denial was no longer tenable. He had to make a decision. He thought of Isabelle, of his colleagues in Paris, of the broader objectives of his service. He thought of the risks he had taken, the sacrifices he had made. And he thought of the people in the file, their faces flashing in his mind. Perhaps there was a way to offer something of value, something that would satisfy Traoré's need for leverage and information without completely compromising the entire intelligence operation or condemning all of his contacts. A partial truth? Carefully curated information that confirmed what they likely already suspected but didn't fully know? It was a dangerous gamble. Captain, Duval began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. I understand the gravity of my situation, and that of the individuals you mentioned. I am willing to discuss the broader context of France's concerns and interests in the region. I can provide insights into how information gathered by our service is used at a strategic level. I can confirm certain operational details that you likely already possess evidence for, thereby saving you the effort of having to extract them from others. He paused, choosing his words with extreme care. However, I cannot, and will not, reveal the identities of individuals who provided information, unless I have verifiable assurance that doing so will genuinely secure their safety and clemency, and that such clemency is part of a mutually agreed process, not just a potential consideration. He was offering a limited controlled burn. Confirming operations, explaining strategic context, perhaps even giving up some operational details that were already compromised or could be plausibly explained away, in exchange for the potential safety of his contacts and a non-public resolution to his own situation. It was risky, bordering on disobeying fundamental protocols, but the lives of his contacts weighed heavily on him. Traoré watched him, his face unreadable. He hadn't expected a full breakdown, perhaps, but this offer of a limited disclosure was interesting. It wasn't full capitulation, but it wasn't outright defiance either. It was a negotiation stance, an attempt to find a middle ground in an impossible situation. You are willing to confirm some operational details, Traoré repeated slowly, testing the words. To discuss the strategic context. But not name names, unless guaranteed clemency. That is correct, Captain, Duval confirmed. I can give you the what and the why in broader terms, confirming aspects of your intelligence, saving you time and effort. This demonstrates good faith on my part, and acknowledges the reality of my capture and your intelligence capabilities. In return, I require a clear path towards clemency for those whose cooperation you have uncovered, and a resolution for my own status that avoids a public spectacle. He knew he was walking a razor's edge. Giving up any information was a betrayal of sorts. But giving up everything was unthinkable. This limited offer was his only chance to influence the outcome for his contacts and himself. Traoré was silent for a long moment, considering. He was a pragmatic leader. A public trial would be a powerful symbol, but it also carried risks, potential leaks of information he didn't want public, unpredictable international reactions, the logistical and legal complexities. A controlled outcome, extracting valuable intelligence while using Duval as leverage for a behind-the-scenes negotiation with France, might be more strategically beneficial. He needed intelligence on French activities, yes, but he also needed to send a message effectively without necessarily creating a full-blown, uncontrollable international crisis. Duval's offer provided a potential avenue for that. "Let me be clear, Mr. Duval," Traoré said finally, his voice low and serious. "Any agreement would require me to verify the information you provide. If you mislead me, if you withhold critical facts, the deal is off. And the consequences will be severe, for you and for everyone involved." "I understand, Captain," Duval replied, his own voice steady. The negotiation had begun in earnest. It was a perilous path, filled with traps and uncertainties, but it was a path forward from the dead end he had faced moments before. The sessions that followed were different. They were less about raw interrogation and more about a tense, high-stakes negotiation and information exchange. Duval, carefully selecting what he revealed, provided detailed information about the general structure of French intelligence operations in the region, the priorities set by Paris, focusing heavily on counter-terrorism and monitoring regional instability, which was partially true and politically palatable, and confirming certain technical details of his communication methods and operational security protocols that he knew had likely already been compromised. He spoke in broad terms about the types of information sought, political analysis, economic trends, security assessments, framing it within the legitimate interests of a foreign power, while carefully omitting the specific details that would expose ongoing sensitive operations or uncompromised assets. He navigated a minefield of questions, trying to anticipate what Traoré and Diallo already knew or suspected, confirming just enough to seem cooperative and credible, while protecting the truly vital secrets. He spoke of the geopolitical competition for influence, acknowledging France's concern over the rise of other powers in the region, but framed it as strategic adaptation rather than malicious intent to destabilize. In turn, Traoré seemed to be evaluating not just the information, but Duval himself. He observed his demeanor, his reactions, his willingness to engage on certain topics while clearly holding lines on others. Colonel Diallo remained more focused on specifics, cross-referencing Duval's statements with their own intelligence. During one of these sessions, Traoré brought up the issue of the detained contacts again. "You are confirming details, Mr. Duval. This shows a degree of cooperation. But the question of the individuals remains. Your sources. Duval had thought about this constantly. He had to find a way to protect them. "Captain," he said, choosing his words with deliberation. "These individuals were not high-level saboteurs. They were citizens with concerns. Some were frustrated with the pace of change, others were genuinely worried about certain influences they saw impacting their country negatively. They were not paid handsomely to betray state secrets, any funds involved were minimal, covering expenses or as tokens of appreciation for their time and the minor risks they perceived. They were misguided, perhaps naive, in thinking they could share information discreetly. They are not hardened traitors." He looked Traoré in the eye. "If you portray them as major enemies of the state, it might serve as a powerful warning, yes. But it might also create resentment, fear, and push others underground. If, however, you show a measure of clemency, portraying them perhaps as citizens led astray by foreign influence, given warnings, and released after a period of detention, it could send a different message, one of strength tempered with national unity. It could encourage those with concerns to voice them through official channels, rather than seeking out foreign ears." It was an audacious plea, attempting to frame clemency not as weakness, but as a strategic move beneficial to Traoré's own goals of national cohesion and control. He was trying to appeal to Traoré's pragmatic side, suggesting a less brutal, potentially more effective way of dealing with internal dissent and foreign influence. Traoré listened intently, stroking his chin. It was clear he hadn't considered this angle. The simple, brutal approach was the default in such situations. But Duval's argument had a certain logic to it, aligning with the narrative Traoré often projected, a leader trying to unite his nation against external pressures. "You suggest leniency for those who aided a foreign spy," Traoré said slowly. "That is a difficult message to send." "It sends a message of confidence," Duval countered. "Confidence that the state is strong enough to tolerate misguided citizens, to educate them, rather than needing to make brutal examples of them. It also weakens the ability of foreign powers to recruit, if the perceived consequences of being caught are less absolute for the Burkinabe citizen." He paused, taking a breath. This was his best, perhaps only, chance to influence the fate of the contacts. "My cooperation, my willingness to provide you with strategic insights and confirm details of our operations, is my guarantee of good faith. In return, I ask for consideration for them. Not impunity, perhaps detention or warnings, but a path away from capital punishment. And for my own situation, a resolution that avoids a public trial." The room was silent again, thick with the weight of the decision. Traoré looked from Duval to Colonel Diallo, who remained impassive. The offer was on the table. A potential win-win. Traoré gets valuable intelligence and leverages Duval for a private negotiation with France, avoids a messy public trial, and potentially adopts a politically shrewd approach to internal dissent, while Duval potentially saves his contacts' lives and secures a less harsh fate for himself. What would you do if you were in Captain Traoré's position? Weighing national security, political messaging, and the potential for strategic gain? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The decision wasn't made in that moment. Traoré ended the session shortly after, leaving Duval once again to the silence of his room, the weight of the possible outcomes crushing him. He had pushed his luck, gambled on Traoré's pragmatism and political calculation. Now, he could only wait. Days turned into weeks. The interrogations became less frequent, replaced by long periods of solitary confinement. He was given books to read, a small mercy that helped maintain his sanity. The guards were still silent, professional. The uncertainty was the worst torture. Had his offer been accepted? Were his contacts safe? What was happening in the world outside those walls? One afternoon, Colonel Diallo entered the room, alone. He didn't sit down. He stood by the table, looking at Duval with that same impassive gaze. "Captain Traoré has made a decision regarding your case," Diallo stated, his voice flat. Duval's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The outcome. "Based on the information you provided," Diallo continued, "which has been partially corroborated by our intelligence, and taking into account the complexities of the situation, Captain Traoré has decided against a public trial. At least for now." Relief washed over Duval, so intense it almost made him weak. Not a public trial. That was the biggest immediate threat averted. "Your status will be that of a detained foreign national," Diallo said. "You will remain in custody here, indefinitely, pending further decisions at the highest level. This is not a short-term arrangement, Duval. You are leverage. Indefinite detention. Not freedom, but not the horror of a show trial either." It was a state of limbo, but a survivable one. "And the individuals you inquired about?" Duval asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Diallo paused, looking at him for a long moment. "Those found to have provided significant classified information will face consequences," he said, choosing his words carefully. "However, Captain Traoré has acknowledged your request and the nuances of their situations. There will be no immediate executions. Their cases are under review. Some may face lengthy prison sentences, others re-education or political rehabilitation, depending on the extent of their collaboration and their current willingness to cooperate with our authorities. No immediate executions. Not a guarantee of safety, but a reprieve. A chance." It was a victory of sorts, hard-won from the jaws of disaster, though the fate of his contacts remained perilously uncertain. He hadn't saved them entirely, but he had potentially pulled them back from the brink of capital punishment, buying them time. "As for your own situation," Diallo concluded, "Captain Traoré will communicate with your government through the appropriate channels. Your detention here is a matter of national security. Do not attempt anything foolish. You are under constant surveillance." Diallo turned and left, the door closing, leaving Duval in the familiar silence. He was a captive, indefinitely, a pawn in a larger geopolitical game. But he had survived. He had faced Captain Traoré, the man who had shaken up a nation, and navigated the treacherous waters of his capture. He had made difficult choices, trading some secrets for the potential safety of others. His fate was uncertain, tied to the complex dance between Ouagadougou and Paris, but he was alive, and he had potentially saved lives. The feeling was a strange mix of grim relief and lingering dread. The sun still beat down on Ouagadougou outside, oblivious to the hidden drama unfolding within these walls. The story of Antoine Duval, the French secret agent captured by Ibrahim Traoré, was far from over. It had merely entered a new, unpredictable phase. His cell was now his world, and the silent, watchful eyes of his captors were his horizon. The geopolitical chessboard had been rearranged, and he was a piece removed from play, yet still influencing the moves from the sidelines. It was a stark reminder that in the world of espionage and international power struggles, capture isn't always the end. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of a different kind of fight. A fight for survival, for leverage, and for the subtle, almost invisible threads of connection that still link a lone agent in his sterile room to the chaotic world he was taken from. The hum of the fluorescent light above him was the only sound, a constant, monotonous reminder of his confinement. But in the silence, Antoine Duval began to listen, to wait, and to plan for a future that was utterly uncertain, held captive by the man who sought to redefine his nation's destiny. If stories like these, delving into the hidden world of espionage, political intrigue, and the clash of nations, capture your imagination, you're in the right place. We explore the complex narratives that shape our world, bringing you gripping tales from the front lines of geopolitical struggle. Consider subscribing to the channel for more stories that pull back the curtain on the conflicts and characters operating in the shadows.